So I am sitting here with Ann Wilson today, and we are talking about writing instruction in Writer's Workshop and thinking about fall September. So Ann, what do you kind of do the first few days? Those are the hardest days in third grade. Kids come to you, they're new to you, new to the classroom. What do you teach those first kind of couple of days to just even get them started with writing?
I think the first thing is the idea of introducing the idea of what are seed ideas, especially since they just came back from summer. And the hope would be that they've had different experiences over summer. So a lot of times what I do is talking about where do we get story ideas,
Okay.
and then bringing in a collection of magazines or newspapers, and then asking the students to look through those and cut out pictures that would remind them of a story. So each student would get a writing notebook with their name on it, and then they can cut out and paste pictures. And so if they were pointing to the picture, then hopefully there's a story from their life about maybe that they had a cat or their cousins had a cat that they took care of. So just starting to collect story ideas just
Okay.
from the very beginning.
So making connections from these visuals with something that's personal to them, somewhere they've gone, a pet
Right.
they've had, things of that sort.
Because the biggest complaint is for them often, or the thing that you hear the most is, I don't know what to write about. And so if you spend that first week just thinking about all the different experiences that they've had, and then letting them talk about and share the front of their covers, and take them home and add to it maybe from pictures from home, then you're avoiding that future dilemma of I don't have anything to write about, because all you have to do is redirect them to the front cover of their notebook.
So it's a starter for September, but at the same time, it's kind of a collection, a bank of ideas for later.
Right.
In the year too.
And then they can, we start actually talking about what is a seed idea, then they can start to just record them. And having them just identify what are the ones that they maybe are most interested in writing about, and then as they actually write about them, they can hopefully check them off. So then this becomes, throughout the whole year, something that they use. You know, on Mondays you can give them 3 minutes to record seed ideas from the weekend, and then you can have them bring it up front to the rug and share, and then hopefully maybe something they say, again, for the student who says, I don't know what to write about. If the students are sharing with each other, hopefully it will trigger a seed idea for another student. So, and the idea of seed idea is something small. So they're not thinking of a time they went to Las Vegas, but trying to become familiar with what's something maybe important that happened in Las Vegas.
So that's your visual here.
Right.
Not the whole watermelon.
Right.
But one bit from that experience.
Right.
Really elaborate on.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. And that language seed idea, I'm guessing, is something you are using all year.
Right.
In talking about writing.
Right.
And you have some charts
I do.
here to share
So,
with us.
The other thing that we've done in reading and in their writing time is almost allowed them to be detectives, and just to try to make them aware of, like, what are all the behaviors of smart writers, or, you know, smart readers would be the same thing. So truly just breaking it down as to how can they do some of their best work if they're working quietly, that they're writing lots of words. They can draw a detailed picture, which starts to get into how could they do their pre-writes once they pick a seed idea. An option is to do a detailed picture. And then if they're talking to you about the picture, then the story is naturally going to come from the picture. They have to be using all of their writing time, so we kind of squashed the idea of I'm done pretty early in the year.
That's a issue that comes up every year, especially
Right.
at the beginning of the year.
So they love to be done. And we can say, sure, maybe you're done collecting seed ideas. Now what are you going to do? Or you're done with your picture. Now what are you going to do? But there's always something else to be done. So with that, they should always have a pencil in their hand. And if they need to be maybe rereading, an option would be to whisper read the writing to themselves. So that they're encouraging the revising and rereading, which again goes back to a lot of the work that they do in their reading time. And that writing time doesn't have to be totally quiet, but it does need to be at a room volume that we can all do our best work.
So this is almost like what you're doing
Right.
during writing time. You
Right.
could be doing any of these things, but these are the things that you're expected, the expectations for
Right.
that time. Okay. And I see you have something about how you explain process
Yes.
to them.
So going back to the idea of how writers are never done, we start to talk about what the writing cycle can look like and how there's a start and end point for a story, but as writers we're constantly moving through. So, seed ideas we should probably put on the chart would be about here.
Okay.
And then once they pick a seed idea, then they start the pre-write. So at the beginning of the year, a lot of times what that means is just a quick sketch. But then throughout the year, we start to talk about all the different ways that, smart writers can start to do a pre-write. And then we do drafting and work our way down to revising and rereading, which this is going to start to have conversations with other members of the classroom. And then editing. And with each of these, there are checklists, that can go along with it if you feel like the need for students to be able to see the changes that they're making to their story. And by publishing, it just means that they're going to finally have a beautiful copy and that they staple the beautiful copy on top of, all of this work.
Okay.
So some students who come in third grade are kind of in that habit of as soon as the story gets messy, they want to recopy it. So if you're not paying attention, you're going to have a couple that have a new piece of paper and are recopying for the sake of recopying. And so part of it too is getting them out of those habits and saying, this copy is supposed to be messy. I mean, that's what good writers do. And to see handwriting from other people or to see a cut and tape, that's what it's supposed to look like. And wait until the end, and then it can be kind of this beautiful thing.
Those personalities that are okay with things being a little more messy and the ones who are a bit more perfectionist and
Right.
want every bit beautiful. Kind of thing.
And even having those conversations with parents. I think they sometimes get concerned. It looks so messy, and it's like, it is, but, when they come to back to school night. But that's what writers do. So to kind of give everyone that freedom to just make those revisions and trust that in the end it will be, okay.
And are kids all over process at the same time, or do you kind of guide and keep the group in one stage for a certain amount of time? Because I know that's a struggle sometimes for teachers too. Some kids editing, other kids drafting. Is there a way that you found to manage that with third graders that worked well for you?
I almost think that we don't even really get here almost until the second trimester.
Okay.
I mean, the first trimester, we're really just using the language for maybe up till here. They do get to publish a story, but we don't concentrate on, like, what does it mean to be an editor and all those. I mean, so I would say at the beginning, we're all doing pre-writes, and they may have done a pre-write for, say, 3 different stories. And then from there, then maybe they can pick one of them, and then we start to talk about what does it mean to draft. And then so maybe at some point they end up with 3 or 4 stories they've drafted, and then from there they pick one, and we start to talk about reading and revising. So at the beginning, it is kind of that holding them back a little bit and letting some of them maybe move through the process, but they don't even know really consciously that that's what they're doing. But hopefully it starts to become something they're more cognizant of, because they have a writer's workshop notebook, and so it's divided into the different parts. So if they're rehearsing, all the stories that are rehearsing are going to stay here.
Okay.
And I mean, they get these at the beginning of the year, but again, we don't really start to talk about all the language until we start to have the instruction about it.
You have to kind of fold it out gradually.
Right. And that drafting, and then their stories can move to revising. Then they move to editing, and then they can move to publishing. And there's a teacher component here. They do a self-edit, and then I have a teacher edit bin. This is where they are publishing their stories, and then once they're published, they do go into a publishing bin. And the hope is, the stories are moving through the process. So this is a helpful way, because I have some who, they'll have like 11 stories sitting and drafting. Or you can have those students who, if they have a whole bunch where they're just great at doing the quick sketch.
Yes.
So you can start to identify, it's not the weakness, but maybe, what do students need a little bit of a push?
Where they get stuck
Right.
at sometimes.
And so to kind of, it's very easy to identify that if you have something like this. And starting to give them also the choice. If there's 11 stories that are stuck here, let's abandon some of them. Just like readers, abandon books. It's like, you thought this was a great story. Maybe you realize you don't have that much information, which is partly why it got stuck. So what if we just take it out, and then it's not thrown away, it's just not ever published.
Do you ever set a requirement that students have to draft so many stories or publish so many?
I think each unit ends up being like a month. With that, each student is going to end up having to have a story make its way through the whole writing process, because we do honor the work we did with the celebration, and to be part of the celebration you do have to have something to celebrate.
Right.
So again, it's never something that it's like you have to get it done, but once celebration day is approaching, it's pretty clear, it needs to be finished if you're wanting to participate in the celebration. And it's not a big celebration, it's just a way to start to share our writing and let a student sit in the author's chair, have them fill out a reflection sheet, about each other's writing.
So it almost serves that deadline of the celebration as a little bit of an impetus of sorts to decide and move on.
Right. So part of the celebration is they start to put things in their portfolio. So each student has their own writing portfolio. And again, it starts out just at the beginning of the year with one that says personal narrative drafts, which is where all the stories that have been abandoned can go. And then there's another divider that says personal narratives, and those are their published pieces.
Okay.
So with the published stories, a celebration sheet might be attached to it that can show all the reflections students maybe did. And this is also a helpful way if you have time to go to the computer lab to allow students to do the word processing for some of their stories and to do it that way.
They get some experience with the technology.
Right. And then as the year goes on, then we can start to introduce the different subjects that we might be having to write about. So we do some units with nonfiction writing. We do work with folk tales and fairy tales with some persuasive writing. We do a unit on prompt writing because that's part of the district standards.
Whole new genre.
So, all of their work does find its way into here. So at the end of the year, they have a whole portfolio that they can take home and share with their families.
And helps to clear out that other folder. Things
Right.
kind of move as they move through the process. They move physically, too,
Right.
from place to place.
And students notice, who has 5 stories that they're getting back, whole punch to put in their portfolio. How come I only have one? So when you talk about accountability, I mean, some of that is the students are just noticing other people's work. We do have a chart that represents who's sharing, and the authors share too. So I think the nice thing about Writer's Workshop is students can, whether they're verbal or not verbal in the traditional classroom, there becomes the expectation that each student will share their story. And that's another visual, because we use the student's name with stickers, and they can start to see who's been sharing and who hasn't. And the ones that always want to share, it's an easy way to say, I think we need to give, so-and-so a turn, because we haven't heard their voice for a while. And so it's like, oh, okay. So all those things.
Allows you to differentiate by maybe those shy kids, ensuring that they participate from time to time because their visual is a little bit smaller. And then, as you said, helping others who are very verbal give other people a chance to talk.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I noticed in the folder you had some other supports, like your dictionary for words
right.
in there, and other tools to help them through what they were thinking about.
Right. So when we talked about doing the author's share, there can be lessons that you do at the beginning of the year to kind of guide what those responses might sound like. So that the student shares, and then they are allowed to call on 3 students. And so going back to the language that you've probably used in your mini lessons, the students could just simply say, I like that your story is focused on a small seed idea. And some of the language may not really be theirs, in September and October. They're kind of saying the words without really knowing exactly what it means.
Of course, we have to teach that.
Yeah, but over time, they can start to identify what is a story with a small seed idea, or, they'll ask, I wonder if your story is a small seed idea. So.
And you can probably also tell from the comments that they're making over time towards November and December who really understands the concepts and who's just still using these language patterns but without really understanding what they're talking about.
Right. So, and it just also you can see, right, who's the good listener, like you say, in terms of getting away from just, I like your story, but I like that you told me about, what your dog looks like, or, again, because part of the listening and speaking strategies, so I like that you read in a strong voice. Even giving students credit for those things. What does it mean to be reading clearly? And some of these things are nice too, because it ties so well into, if you're doing partner reading in your reader's workshop, they need these strategies to be able to work effectively in a partnership. And granted, there's some that I still have to turn off the air conditioner, when they're going to share, because they're so soft-spoken. But she's choosing to read her stories a lot more than she ever did at the beginning of the year. So, it's definitely an improvement.
There is growth.
There's,
maybe not in all the areas
right.
you would hope to see. And even here with your comment about how to respond to listeners, you're also teaching them civil discourse, manners, things of that sort too.
Right. So anybody that they call on who says something, they say thank you to the person for whatever compliment or whatever question that they had. So they are totally self-directed, with that. Yes, I'm still in the room and I'm still listening and taking notes, but once it comes time for sharing, it's very much, almost like their writer's workshop time. So that's been neat to see.
They become a community of sorts, hold each other accountable for the kinds of questions, comments they give.
Right.
Any of those other charts that you want to mention, things that have worked well for you?
Again, at the beginning of the year, if you're wanting to get specific about different types of seed ideas, and if you're somebody who has props, some things for those students who are struggling with coming up with ideas and maybe who are a little bit more show and tell oriented because of past experience.
Or maybe English language learners,
right.
I'm thinking.
They could bring in an object to be able to kind of show that is important to them. Some of them, might be able to talk about if they have photos, are there special places or pictures that they have. If you want to have them just think about who are important people in their life, lots of them do have siblings or different experiences. So you can kind of break down what is the notion of a small seed idea.
You're kind of giving them categories
right.
to think about writing. So it doesn't have to be so specific. You can also think about categories of information.
And we've done it different ways, different years. So I think when we first started, we were very categorical in our seed ideas. And I think as the years have gone on, we haven't needed to be as categorical. So, some of that I think might have to do with, right, at the beginning when I was first teaching, I had a lot more English language learners. And as the years have gone on, I have basically EO or advanced. So it might not need to be as specific about what is a seed idea. They kind of get it.
Every year, different depending on the makeup of the class,
right.
who you have.
Yeah. Again, just when you're trying to make sure everyone's doing something in writing time, this goes back to that question of, do we all have to be doing the same thing? And no, there is a lot of freedom. So this is kind of, again, showing that you might all be doing different things, but you're all doing something in the class time. So to say that I'm thinking doesn't really go like too well. So they could be adding seed ideas to their notebook, but then I'll say, so what do you think you're going to do after that? And then they can say, oh, I think I might, start to sketch a story. And it's like, okay. So they're sketching a story, and you see that they're almost done. It's like, the intent is not to color in this beautiful picture. It's a quick sketch. And again, that's something that I demonstrate. And so it's like, okay, well then maybe I'll tell it to my friend. It's like, okay. So you're always kind of trying to do that gentle push about, there's that expectation of, well, what do you think you could do next? And even spending time, sometimes during sharing time, pulling popsicle sticks and just having them say, and maybe not share a story, but, well, how did you use your writing time today?
Almost like a status of the class that you do to show them that you are paying attention to what they're doing every day.
And that we don't all have to be doing the same things, but how great that, that Isaiah was able to sketch a story and to start to draft it. Wow, he did two things. Is there anyone else who did two things? So that accountability, and I think some of that endurance and stamina,
It sounds like your comments kind of lift the level of expectation slowly across that beginning time.
Hopefully.
So with some, it works well right away, and with others, it takes a bit more of our patience, I think.
And I guess the last thing would just be, there are different types of checklists that you could use with students. So, after you've taught different concepts and you want to be sure that they are utilizing them, then you could have them attach, a small checklist, and you could have it be done by themselves, or it could be done by you or by somebody else in the class. But again, it just makes them really be mindful of, are they using the things that you've taught them? And if they're not, that's okay. If they find that there's, things that they haven't been able to check off, the whole idea is that they're supposed to go back and then be able to rework on it to check them off. And so then eventually everything will have been done if it makes sense in the story.
So it's almost a completion checklist and a revision checklist at the same time. Oh, I need to add this in. Oh, this isn't really done like I thought it was done.
Yeah.
And that way both you and the student have the same understanding of the expectation for that particular piece of writing.
And if they're comfortable with not having certain things checked off, I think it starts that whole conversation of grading. I mean, we can't be surprised about certain grades if we're comfortable just leaving certain things out. So there's that whole thing about, I can't give you a grade based on what I think you can do. I mean, there's a certain responsibility of, you need to kind of show and to put in the effort. So we do have, different conversations about that too, of self-reflection. Are we using our writing time well? Stopping in the middle of writing time and saying, do you see somebody who you think we could recognize for using their writing time well? What does it look like to get a pencil during writing time? How should the classroom be? So the class is set up for them to be able to do everything they need to do effectively.
Sounds like there's a lot of layering those first few weeks about what you want them to notice. You're naming and noticing behaviors that are appropriate behaviors that are almost exemplary kinds of things. And it's not just the mini lessons and the checklists. It's kind of those things that you're helping the kids notice in a certain way to show that this is what we're after. This is the environment we're trying to create in here.
Right. And truly starting with baby steps. I mean, I think they work just specifically with their notebook probably for the first couple of weeks. We don't even introduce the idea of like the folder, at the very beginning. The whole idea of the portfolio isn't even introduced until after we've had a couple of celebrations and there's kind of a stack of things to put in. So some of that is just kind of like it slowly evolves, and you kind of slowly start to show them the big picture. So I think sometimes the hardest part as a teacher is just to trust that you're doing it in a way that does make sense for them to really be getting it. And if to rush through it, I feel like sometimes almost devalues the different parts of the writing process. And so, if you want quality work, then take the time to really make sure they're doing each part to the best that they can and really understand what they're doing.
It's kind of like you're reminding me of start slow to go fast. And even those tools like the portfolio, I can imagine you saying a week before, wow, I don't know, maybe you guys are almost ready for portfolios. Last group year's third graders weren't ready until March. And it's just December, but you guys just might be ready. Now, those little psychological ways we have of making the tools really important, really special, and even sometimes prolonging that if they're showing they need more time till they're ready to handle those things.
And the flexibility of them, as the district changes their writing standards. I mean, there's flexibility within that workshop model because, the dividers can change. The writing process stays the same, but the content that's in it can just be modified. So that's kind of freeing that basically anything that you want to do, if it needs to relate to different standards or expectations, you can make it work using the workshop model and those tools.
Well, thank you for all that you shared with us.
Sure.
Great stuff.